Hello again. My name is Bartosz Gonczarek. I'm a lecturer on our business university in Wrocław. I lecture international business, and this slot and this presentation is about cultural differences in entrepreneurship. And my goal is to give you a sense of what sort of differences exist when you're starting a business or when you're operating a business, when you work with engineers in Poland or entrepreneurs from the US. Because obviously, in order to understand those differences, you need to be part of an organization that works both in Central Europe, but also in the US. I'm one of those guys who created Explain Everything. I'm a co-founder of the company. And you already mentioned that we were recognized by Apple for leading the classroom. That was in 2020. At peak of COVID, our software was somehow helpful and used by teachers around the world to work with students remotely. When there was no possibility to meet them in the classroom, they use our software to record short videos or work with students online. And we were so happy to receive this recognition. It was actually the first time that company from Poland received this prestigious award. So we were super happy about this. What is Explain Everything? What we have created is a whiteboard that runs on mobile devices and allows teachers to present in a more richer way than they could with just a flip chart or physical whiteboard like the one we have there in the corner. They can use digital devices, and instead of just lay out their thoughts by drawing or writing, they can use rich media. They can even use web browser. And the process can be recorded. So whatever they present, whatever they want to transmit as knowledge, they can just capture as a video and then use later on. And the same with students. Students can use our product, and they do that in order to express their understanding, show their understanding. So they can capture the way they can explain the topic that they just learned, right? And share that back with teacher. And what's interesting, what happens is that if they know how to explain something they've learned, that means they really understood this. So in the process of recording such videos, students often discover what they don't get yet, and they improve themselves, right? So it's the process of creating video, it's the process of expressing themselves, gives them this ability to improve their understanding. So that's Explain Everything. We're on most of the platform. We're on all mobile platforms, which gives us great chance to observe how market for apps and mobile product changed over time. We started in, as you mentioned, over 10 years ago, which is a long time for mobile products. iPads, we began even before iPads were the thing. We were beginning our exploration of the market for multi-touch devices before iPhone even. So when we've learned that there are a lot of opportunities related to this type of interface, we were just ready for iPad. And we were one of the first whiteboard apps on the iPad, and since then, one of the most successful apps for this use case. That's some of the team of Explain Everything. This is a picture that we took in Wrocław on the top of one of the most prestigious hotels. And as you see, we have an international team here. team of dedicated individuals that believe that what they do here locally changes the way that knowledge is transmitted around the world. So this chance of leaving a mark, making an impact, is really something that keeps us motivating and push hard against all odds and against all differences and against all problems in communication and what have you. And these are the foundations I use for our today's presentation that allow me to speak about cultural differences in entrepreneurship. And as I mentioned, you have to live through it in order to understand it. So what are those differences? And here's a short sentence to get us started. Because when you look at entrepreneurs starting from Central Europe or starting somewhere in the US, we do have a different point of our origin. We start from a very different points of origin. And by that, the way we communicate, we work, or even think differs. And I want to explore those three areas of communication, of work, and of the way we think about problems. And my goal is to show you that whatever problems we face, let's say, from our European perspective, it's not a liability, it's more of an asset. It's something that gives us some unique opportunities and unique skills and unique strengths that we speak about and we teach on this university. When I meet my students, and tomorrow I do have a lecture for students from Germany, they come here interested in how we work in Central Europe and what sort of differences exist between our region and Western Europe. And we speak a lot about those differences, and we try to explore them during such lectures. So when we do that, I'm very open to have a discussion about the differences. We use our software, and we just exchange ideas. I think that's one of the most important things for those that want to, let's say, participate in MBA, international or MBA executive studies, because, well, you meet practitioners and you face real-time, real-world problems, and we speak about real-world challenges, and we can exchange ideas. Sometimes I do have students that don't agree with my perspective, my point of view, and then we discover that what works in IT does not work necessarily somewhere else. And this makes it a very interesting discussion. Okay, this worked for me, but not necessarily for you because there are different circumstances. So these differences in perspectives let us exchange and learn from each other. So I guess that's one of the strengths of this university, that we do have this possibility to exchange and speak about what works, what is our asset, or what might be our liability, and lock us from opening some rewards from cooperation. So let's discuss first the starting points. From the perspective of entrepreneur, when you're starting in Poland, let's say, there are a few things that are obviously clear. Well, the economic freedom, I took the ranking of Poland versus US in the index of economic freedom. Of course, there's a little bit less freedom in Poland. We're getting worse over time, which is not good. Still, hey, it's still not bad. We can operate and build our businesses. So that's, the difference here is not as big as, for example, difference in access to capital, and that's the metric number 2. Venture capital investments are beyond comparison between Central Europe and the US. Well, The reasons are obvious. The VC market started in the US in the 70s. And I remember 10 years back how immature it was for us here in Poland. It was hard for us as company to get financing 10 years back. Now, when we speak with students, I advise them to look into opportunities existing in Poland because they already exist. The situation changed throughout those 10 years dramatically. But still, this is not a mature market for capital, and the biggest hub for VC financing is actually Berlin, which is not far, so that's okay. Still, there is a huge difference in access to capital. So obviously, this influences the way we structure and build our businesses. Also, the talent. Why 3 dots in here? Because I remember when we first started and we were about to build iOS software, there were 0 engineers we could hire. There's no one here. So we had to train them. The good thing is that we do have technical universities in the region. So there's a talent pool you can tap into and use. And we were lucky enough to find individuals wanted to learn the new skill of developing for iPad and iPhone. And we did that. Fast forward 7 years, if I remember correctly, I had one engineer at Apple telling us that we have one of the best iOS development teams in the world. Just think about it. You start from just technical universities and pool of talent here and there, just pockets of talented people, and you can build the skills and you can specialize to reach that high. And I think that's incredible. This is a resource that helped us to power through a lot of problems because we had talented people that were ready to take on the challenge and deal with that challenge. In the US, of course, situation is different. You have talented people, but the problem there is that those that are talented, they most probably work already for Apple, Facebook, Google, what have you, right? So it's hard to compete in terms of wages. What's hard to compete in terms of what can you offer to them. But in Poland, yes, you do have those that have the fundamentals, let's say, and the skill set, but you need to build from there and help them to specialize in a way that is helping your enterprise. That's why 3 dots. I couldn't find any useful metric here. Coming back to our cultural differences, let me speak some more about the differences in the way we communicate, okay? And it's an interesting topic because I've learned a lot over time. I thought initially that being a kid who grew up learning, watching American television, cartoons, or even learning from Monty Python and getting a bit of that sense of humor, I'm okay and I'm going to excel in the communication with entrepreneurs and colleagues from that region. And I discovered it's not that easy because there are a lot of differences in the way we actually structure our communication. Even if we speak English, there are things that sets us apart and we need to be aware of them. Like, for example, our way we try to approach conversations, and this is something I see a lot. When I am with my team here from Poland, we are very much focused on the details. While people from that region, from the US, they'd like to start from the top, from this helicopter view on the problem, from the vision. They like to set the vision, while we're just waiting for the moment to get into details and discuss them. Because yes, that's how we think. And most probably that is not the best starting point. So the big difference I see is how we approach the communication in the first place, from which place we want to start our conversation, from the top and go down, or from the bottom and go up, right? And it repeats again and again. And if we're not aware of that we like those nitty-gritty, we like those details, but we should perhaps keep that for later discussion and begin by setting directions and just covering the ground so we have the similar perspective on what we're going to discuss. Perhaps that's better for people that we're going to, let's say, do business with. Which gets me to the second point, indirect and straight. What does that mean? It means that for us, we're very straightforward and direct, and it's related to our culture. We like to set the record straight and be understood that way. While there are traits and habits and even rituals in the way that certain things are communicated, let's say in English language. There's this famous hamburger way of framing the message. If you want to get to this better part of something you want to express, you sugarcoat it first, right? And then you get to this not so pleasant part, and then again, you give something pleasant. So there's like this nice things come from the top and the bottom. And yet we don't do that here, right? We go all the way straight to the bone and speak about those things that should be talked about. And people we talk with, they might not be ready for that. They need this sugarcoating, they need this framing, right? And it was a surprise for us at the very beginning. We, as a team, we had to learn to deal with this need to frame the message right. But again, I'll come back to it later. It's a difference in the way we think, and it's a difference in the way we approach things. We like to be fast, but that might not be the best strategy to communicate, at least early on. Also, there's this ego thing, how confident we are versus how defensive we try to be in the conversation. I would say that those that understand the details, they are more likely to begin conversation from this defensive mode because they don't know they know good things and bad things. They know the nasty details, and sometimes even subconsciously they are aware of the problems that exist. While our partners from the US, usually without understanding the low level of what we're dealing with, right? The details of what we're dealing with, they're much more confident because they're just not aware. So our understanding of the topic in very small details puts us in this problematic situation where we're losing our confidence and we sometimes begin being defensive. I noticed that the other day. We had a conversation 2 days back with our colleagues from the US, and one of team members from our team, she was prepared for a presentation, and she had so many materials with her. She had everything at her disposal. So she was well prepared and still began the meeting being defensive. And I was shocked. Why? I mean, they appreciated her perspective, and still she began that meeting without the confidence that was needed, which tells a lot about how we approach things, how we think, and how many details we know about the topic, which puts us in this sometimes defensive position, which does not work well sometimes. Now, I'd like to point to some challenges in cooperation and the way we transmit messages when we cooperate over distance. We work with teams in the US, we work from Poland, there's obviously time difference. This does not This makes it more problematic and challenging for us to have everyone on the same page. So for example, textual versus verbal. Can you guess how much of your message that you want to transmit is actually transmitted when you're using a text communicator like Slack or Skype, right? Or Microsoft Teams? Because I would say that it's less than 15 or 20% than what you would be able to communicate meeting someone, right? It's just a message. But there's a difference in how this message is received that you make by using the tone of your voice, that you make when you use your body language, right? And we don't think of that when we approach this conversation. So I had this situation the other day when we had a great meeting early in the morning. We had our first coffee in the office, and we were trying to solve some problem. And this problem, we had a very good discussion among Polish team members. And we got some conclusions out of this discussion, and we presented them as using our communicator as text. So we described the solution. Look, we have this problem, here's what we suggest, blah, blah, blah. And that was it. And that was a mistake, as I realized later. Because our colleagues in the US, they were not ready waking up in the morning and seeing a text appearing in the communicator at 2 or 3 a.m. their time. They were not ready to take in solutions. Why? Because they never participated in the conversation and working out of those solutions. They were just surprised by having solutions being described for them coming from Poland. So we never included them as real participants of the problem, did we, right? But for us, we were too straightforward, and we used textual way of expressing our ideas. Instead, just waiting a little, setting a call, and letting them be participants and work out the solutions together. So there's a danger in using communicators that we've learned a lot in our days. Now, the other thing, language use. Initially, and maybe I'll use a story, not from Explain Everything, but from other startup, very successful around the world. I won't tell you the name of that startup, but it's a real story. The co-founder of that startup told me that when they had their first web page, they of course translated everything to English by themselves, of course. They thought it's great, of course, but it wasn't. And it backfired when they tried to hire high-stake manager in the US. And this lady decided at the last stage of recruitment process to pull back. And they were like disoriented, what's going on? Everything was fine and dandy, and then she pulled back at the very last stage. So my friend called her and asked her, okay, tell us the reasons, because we really want to understand what we did wrong. And she said, look guys, I like you, the business is fine, it makes a lot of sense, but then again, I looked at your webpage and there's something off. There's something wrong with it, and I cannot tell you what it is, but it doesn't feel right. So I have my doubts. And then, you know, what that was, right? What was off? It was the use of language that we, born in this culture, cannot actually grasp. These are those tiny things that we might not be aware of even. So when we were trying to build our resources, our web pages, we always tried to use expats living here in Poland, in Central Europe, to help us out, knowing that there are limits in the way we use the language, we express ourselves in the language, right? And I see a lot of entrepreneurs not seeing that limit, right? And they fall into the same trap. So that's something we've learned. Also, in terms of communication, there's a huge difference in the way we express our buy-in, express how we're committed to something. I'll just explain that with a little story. Imagine group gathering, team gathering, where you have people of two cultures, from the US and from Poland, meeting together, and we share some vision, and our CEO is speaking about some important elements of strategy. And then what happens? Colleagues from the US, they go, yes, we'll do it. It's a fantastic idea. This is what we want to achieve. And colleagues from Poland, they just sit in silence, right? And our CEO says, okay, so let's have like 5 minutes of this awkward silence, and then we can close the meeting. But the awkward silence is not about Polish team members not being committed. It's something else. It's something else. But it's not a commitment they can express the same way by just showing that with their body language, that they are on top of it, they want to nail it. No, they will raise their questions, but we need to find a different way of getting their input, because they're not going to express the same way during that gathering in front of people when there's a language barrier, when there are many things that work that stop them from expressing themselves. And these are the things that are really challenging when you operate on both continents and have people that is composed of participants from different cultures. And lastly, I just want to briefly tell you a few things about the differences in the way we think. Because we grow up in different cultures, and of course it affects the way we think and perceive problems and deal with challenges. Let me start from this abundance and simplicity thing. You know, when we started from here with our software, it was a multi-purpose tool designed for everything. And that's in the name, explain everything, right? Because we could design it in a way to have multiple functions, it was easy for us as engineers, right? As a team of talented people, we could cram in a lot of features and see what works. And it's a different way to approach the problem, the process of building solution than our colleagues in the US take. So we observed companies that competed with us in the US building something very simple with not 15 features, but just 2. And we were very, very committed to develop our tool in a rich way. So we have more and more features, and they were streaming it down to less and less. Why? I would say it comes to this point, being informed or being spontaneous. Our colleagues in the US, our competitors in the US, they were closer to the market, and the market for us was, of course, schools in the US. And by being close to the market, they were better informed what should be included as a functionality in the software. And for us, it was a trial and error. It was an evolution. We throw a lot of functionality, we put a lot of functionality into the solution, and we see what sticks, right? And we learn from that. We were not so well informed. We were more spontaneous in the process, which backfired later with the complexity of the solution. Of course, there are benefits to it. Of course, some of our users appreciate this richness, this abundance of features. But there are limits to this way of thinking, because then you need to maintain a lot of features instead of just few, right? It's more expensive that way. But it begins from this way we think. Are we informed enough? Or we need to just see what works and perhaps later on abandon these features that are not needed. Sooner or later you'll find out in the process that if you have thousands of users, there is no a single feature you can drop. because there are users that depend on it, and they will tell you so once you remove the feature. So it's not that easy. I would say maybe it's even better to start from, as our colleagues, our competitors in the US did, from being informed and start with something small and grow from there, instead of starting with a large feature set and just narrow it down later on. We were never able to do that, actually. And that's a difference in the way we think, because for us, the way to innovate was to do what's possible. We took this brilliant technology, multi-touch panels, iOS apps, then Android and web, and we just check, okay, is it possible to have a browser on the whiteboard? Yes, it is. Okay, let's try it. Is it possible to have 3 videos played at the same time? Yes, it is. Okay, let's put it in. And by that, we were just innovating and playing with the solution. Instead, we could ask ourselves what is really needed and perhaps trim the costs of maintaining all of that in the future. So these are basic challenges. What I tried to express here is just to give you a little bit of information of what we discuss during our lectures, during our workshops at the university. What I like about working with students here is that, of course, we always explain everything during our meetings, and my students are actively participating in what we discuss. So each of these topics, we can go into the weeds of these topics, chuck it into the pieces, and discuss those pieces with my students' participation, which, again, creates this opportunity for me as well to learn from them. So I strongly suggest to use our school, sign up for MBA, participate in my international business lectures. Here are my details. You can find me on LinkedIn. I also do have my webpage, and I'm looking forward to meet you during next school year. Thank you.